Welcome. I'm Carl Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. I'm speaking with Dennis Vignieri, President and CEO of Kenosha Beef International. Thank you for joining me today.
You're very welcome.
Tell me, how did Kenosha Beef International get started?
My grandfather was an Italian immigrant, and he migrated to Kenosha, which was an Italian community at that time. And he worked in a hide tannery in Waukegan, Illinois, and he had a desire to go into business for himself. So what he did is he borrowed $35 from my grandmother's cookie jar, and on his way home from the tannery, he would stop into dairy farms that were very prevalent in Kenosha County at the time and buy veal calves. He would then, on the weekend, go out and pick up those same veal calves and take them to a community slaughterhouse in the city of Kenosha. And for so many dollars a head, you could process your animals there. He always told the story that if the weather was warm, they would have to process them on Sunday night because there was no commercial refrigeration at that time. If the weather was cold, they could process them on Saturday morning, and they would be fine until my grandfather's brother would take them to the local mom and pop grocery stores, which were very plentiful at the time in the city of Kenosha. And veal was a staple due to the Italian community, and that's how the business began.
Okay, what was his interest in going into a veal business, a dairy agricultural business, since he worked at a tannery?
Well, I guess he just had a desire to do something that would provide food for people. And he had a little bit of history because he was in the tannery working there, which is close to animals and agriculture. But he just decided that that's what he'd like to try.
And was there anybody else who helped him initially get that business started?
There was his father-in-law kind of helped him a little bit. He had a smaller role to play in that. But really, Grandpa being an entrepreneur and having the courage to step out and do that was the lead in that relationship.
Okay. And what year was that?
That was 1936.
And when did your dad start working in the business?
My dad, when my grandpa had the idea that he wanted to do this, he approached my dad, and my dad was only 12 years old at that time. And my dad, being only 12 years old, said, "Yeah, Dad, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do it." So he had various duties while he was going to high school, but then he went into the service immediately after high school. When he got out of the service, he was rewarded with his very own pickup truck for the business of Frank Vignieri and Sons Meatpacking, and that's when he became full-time into the business.
Okay, and at that time, were they still processing only veal?
They would process veal. They would process, at that time, full-size animals, and then later on we transgressed into actually processing hogs. And I don't think we ever did sheep or lamb or anything like that, but it was hogs and it was beef and veal calves.
Okay, and when your dad joined the company full-time, how did your dad and your grandfather share the duties?
Primarily, my grandfather would go to what we call auction markets. So there were small sales barns located around the state of Wisconsin because we had to buy the animals we needed to fill the orders, so the certain type of animals. And my dad would basically take the orders kind of on the sales side, if you might say, and then manage the plant and keep the plant operating.
So the orders came in and then the livestock was purchased, or did the livestock get purchased to fit the orders? Was there ever any issues with I don't have enough animals, or why did you buy this? Because I need more of something else. Was there any issues that ever came up in that regard?
I think they came up quite regularly, and I remember my dad telling me a story about the fact that he had orders for X amount of product of a certain type. So Grandpa was going to go to the sale barn and buy animals to match that. Well, my grandpa had an idea that if he liked something, he bought it. So that's why we had different animals on the farm. We had horses, we had sheep, we had lamb, we had hogs, and we had cattle, because the cattle didn't always fit what the orders were. So my dad complained to him one day because he had orders for X amount of product of a certain type, and my grandpa didn't buy animals that really matched up with that very well. So he told my dad, he said, "Listen, Charlie," that was my dad's name, he said, "I'll buy them, you kill them." In other words, figure out how to make it work. So that was an interesting scenario at that time.
So when your grandfather started the business, where was it located?
The business basically was located at the community slaughterhouse. It was in the Coos Fertilizer building, which was on, I believe it's 14th Avenue, the west side of the tracks, and about 3 or 4 blocks south of Washington Road. And that facility was there, and that was the community slaughterhouse that people could bring their animals to. Then Coos took the other byproducts that weren't sold, and then they would make them into fertilizer.
Okay, and what was the name of the company at first?
It was called Frank Vignieri and Sons.
And how long did that name stay?
It stayed for quite a number of years. I don't know exactly how long it stayed, but it stayed that way, I would say probably 10 or 15 years for sure. And then they changed the name to Kenosha Packing Company.
All right. And then how did the name progress to where we are today?
Well, in later years, we were doing a lot of business, and the things like the livers and the tongues and things like that were marketable commodities in foreign communities. So we had to do business internationally. So we came up with the name of Kenosha Beef International at that time because we were selling worldwide.
Okay. And Kenosha Beef International is still the name of the parent company, or the...
You could say that, yes. So we operate today as Kenosha Beef International, doing business as Birchwood Foods. And the entity that all of our customers come to today is called Birchwood Foods.
Okay, and tell me a little bit about where processes were done. I mean, when your grandfather started the company, where did he locate? Did he have, you say he started with at the Coos property, but then did he move out to where the business currently stands?
Yes, probably sometime in the mid-40s, Coos closed the community slaughterhouse. And so my grandpa had to find a place to continue on with business. So there was a 40-acre potato farm for sale in the town of Paris. It is, as you say, where our current headquarters are now today. And he bought that, converted the potato cellar over to our first slaughter and kill floor. And that's where we began. We then shortly thereafter had to have a processing facility because we were growing and we were processing quite a few animals. I remember Dad was telling me about when they got their first order for the city of Racine. And it was a big deal for the company to now take products to Racine, because primarily we were only Kenosha and Kenosha County prior to that. So they purchased a building on 65th Street and 39th Avenue in Kenosha. The building is still standing there, and that became our first processing facility.
Okay, and then as you grew, you moved everything to that current location where you have your headquarters and plants?
Yes, eventually we had a couple of different moves along the way. The first move probably was the fact that we were generating boneless beef trimmings through our process of cutting the meat and preparing it for the markets. And we needed a place to go with that, so we needed to get into the ground beef business. So Grandpa purchased a building at 22nd Avenue and Roosevelt Road, which was called Packers Outlet at the time. And Packers Outlet did a number of different things for restaurants, hotels, and institutions. We basically moved out of all of the general business that they had that wasn't ground beef related and focused solely on ground beef. And in addition to that, our potato cellar converted to a kill facility kept growing, but we couldn't grow fast enough to meet the demand of our slaughter facility. So we bought a used slaughter facility in Hebron, Illinois, which is just south of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and started to do all of our slaughter out there in that facility. So then that precipitated, because business kept growing, the need for a larger processing facility other than the one we had at 65th Street and 39th Avenue. So in the late 60s, early 70s, we built at the headquarter location a brand new facility where we could do all of the boning and breaking down of the carcasses into the subprimals at that location, and that's where we currently are today. The Packers Outlet business, the board at the time was uncomfortable with the name of Packers Outlet, thinking maybe those are secondary products or maybe not as good a product or things of that nature. So a discussion over many meetings ensued as to what the name of that should be. And Dad went to a meeting in Chicago, got out of the car, and he saw the street sign and said Birchwood. And he came back and said, we're going to call our ground beef division Birchwood. So it was at that time Birchwood Meat and Prevision. It eventually changed to Birchwood Foods, which it is today. And that became our 100% ground beef division.
Okay, and how long, or do you still have the Hebron plant?
We do not have the Hebron plant. We had to close the Hebron plant in, I believe it was summer of 1991. We were doing about 1,000 head a day of cattle in that facility. Most of that meat we used in our own processes, and some we sold to others. Well, a company at the time called Iowa Beef Processors started a packing plant about 250 miles away to the west. And they were going to process 2,500 head a day. So in northeast Illinois and the surrounding areas, there was not the volume of cattle able to provide enough cattle for both of those facilities. And they had much deeper pockets than did we, and they would continually outbid us for that live animal, and to the point that we were losing so much money we were forced to close that facility and buy the meat that we needed from other packers and have it delivered to Kenosha.
Okay. Tell me how you started in the business.
Well, we lived, and I grew up next to the original potato cellar converted facility, and on weekends or during summer vacation, my playground was over at the plant. So we had some farming going on there. We had animals that we kept. Again, my grandpa would buy different animals, so we would actually keep animals there. And so I went over at about the age of 10 and said, I would like to do some work. And they said, that's great. They handed me a pitchfork and said, here, start cleaning the manure out of the barns. And it began from that point on.
Okay, what other jobs along the way? As a 10-year-old, obviously, you started where you say. You must have had other jobs along the way through high school and afterward. Tell me some of the jobs that you actually
Well,
have
as I
done.
was growing up and before high school, I would focus my attention there. So there were some farming things to do there. There were animals to take care of. There was manure to spread every day from the packing plant. So mostly outdoor related things. And then I think as a couple years passed by and I got older, then I would start doing things inside the plant. Things were different than they are today. Number one, I don't think you can have child labor today like we did back then.
Unless you're in the family.
Unless you're in the family, I think you're correct. So I would do various jobs. I did sanitation. I worked in what we called where the offal goes, which are the gut sets of the animals. I worked in that room, and I did all types of different jobs around that plant. I would drive the cattle into the chute, and again clean out those pens because those were a mess, and every day they had to be cleaned. So I probably had the less desirable jobs, but that's all right. Give them to the kid; he'll be fine. And I did that. As I got to high school age, I went to St. Joe's High School in Kenosha, and then I would walk there every day after school to the packing plant, to the processing plant on 65th and 39th. And I would be doing all types of jobs there too, whether it was cleaning the floor, making boxes to put product into, washing trucks, you name it. And then I got into, as I got older, I got into truck driving and actually delivering meat. First starting with what we call a straight truck, which is a smaller vehicle, and then into tractor trailers and delivering into Chicago and the like. So it just kept expanding. I did, as I got earlier on into my career, I worked in all different positions in our plants. I worked in our inedible rendering plant in the city of Kenosha. I worked in the processing facilities. I worked in maintenance. I worked in transportation. I worked in shipping and receiving. I tried to do beef boning one time, but I didn't do very good at that. So I decided that I probably was better at doing other things. So.
Okay. And today you are president and CEO.
Mm-hmm.
You described how the circumstances under which the Hebron plant closed. Did that also change the focus of what you would be doing in the industry? Or did that change later?
No, that changed shortly after, probably within about 4 years after that. So when we closed the Hebron facility, we had to buy the quarters of beef from other beef packers to continue on with what we called our fabrication operation, which is where we broke down the beef quarters and then shipped them to basically retail grocery stores, in addition to what we call fresh chilled beef. So we would package the meat, and it had to have very good bacterial standards because it would stay fresh for about 35 days or longer because it had to go by boat over to Japan. And that was very good business for us. We liked it a lot, but the Japanese were very stringent, so they were always in our plant minding over what we were doing, and I think it made us better as a supplier. And we did that for a number of years. And we were processing about 1,000 head of cattle a week in the Kenosha facility. And we were buying all of that, as I said, on the street. And then the packers that were selling us those animals, there's no secrets, probably today or back then, but they would watch what we were doing and they decided, well, they would like to do that too. Because my dad was a pioneer in the boxed beef industry. So instead of just having a primal of meat wrapped, delivered, it was further refined and put in a vacuum packaged bag and put in a cardboard box, which was much more manageable, and you could get a greater return on that.
So you didn't deliver a side of beef anymore.
No.
You delivered in boxes, and what did you put in those boxes specifically? Were there just steaks that were cut, or were there other items of roast? What did you put in the boxes?
In the beginning, the boxed beef was what we call a subprimal. So when you process an animal, you end up with 4 quarters: 2 front quarters, where the front legs and coming back, and 2 hind quarters, which were the rear of the animal and the rear legs. So those could be further broken down into various parts and components. So in the beginning of boxed beef, it was just those subprimals. They would maybe be trimmed more. Sometimes the shanks were taken off and things of that nature, so that when it got to the retailer, to the grocery store, there was mostly usable product. They didn't have to dispose of a lot of things that they couldn't sell. Eventually, we continued to refine that process, and we came out with what we call tray-ready beef. So now you're getting into where steaks are cut, where roasts are cut, and things of that nature, and they're further refined by being in a package that they could take out of the box. It had its own tray and overwrap. They would simply put their pricing on it and put it out in the meat counter. So that's how that whole process transgressed. So getting back to the processing facility in Kenosha, I said we were at 1,000 head a day. We then, because the other packers were not selling us the carcasses, we went down to 500 head a day in a single shift. And then we were eventually in 1995 forced to get out of that business altogether. And then we had a difficult decision to make, is what are we going to do? So then we decided to go 100% into ground beef. And that is under the Birchwood name, and that's basically what our products are today, is 100% ground beef in various forms, shapes, sizes, and product types.
Okay, and how much ground beef do you process, make in a week? Or
We have, right now we have 4 facilities. So our headquarters are in Kenosha, Wisconsin. We have a plant in Columbus, Ohio. And we have 2 plants in Norcross, Georgia, which is a suburb of Atlanta. And collectively, on an average week, we're between 10 and 10.5 million pounds of ground beef that we produce weekly.
Okay, and who are your biggest customers?
Our largest customer is Wendy's today, which is what we call a quick service restaurant, because our business is about 85% quick service restaurant and about 15% retail. So for the quick service customers, again, Wendy's is our largest, Taco Bell is second largest, Burger King is probably third, Dairy Queen probably fourth, and then you go on down the line to A&W, Steak and Shake, we do Chili's, we do Applebee's, we do a lot of different concepts, all in a ground beef.
And do you ship this nationwide? Are you still in the international business?
We do some international, but not a lot, and it's for just specific certain quick service restaurant customers. For a couple of our customers, one of our longest standing customers, we are a nationwide supplier from coast to coast. And for most suppliers, we are more of a regional, so basically east of the Mississippi, because freight is such a large factor these days in what you ship to a customer, that they will have different producing facilities maybe within a 500 or 600 mile radius of that producer's facility, so that it doesn't cost them too tremendous an amount to get the product to market.
And what is the methodology of buying the beef trimmings to grind? What do you look for? How is it graded or measured?
The first thing we have to do is because we have such a huge food safety responsibility and pathogens are always present, we have to take all of that very seriously. So we go in and approve a plant that would like to sell us the raw material. And then past that, there are specifications for the raw material as far as what its fat and lean content are. For example, to make a typical 75% lean ground beef, you use a lean component, which is about 90% lean, 10% fat, and then a 50% component, which is 50% lean and 50% fat. You blend those together in a certain ratio, and that will yield you a 75% fat lean patty. So we look at the quality of the product that the supplier wants to give us. We look at the price, although price is kind of universal because there's published markets every day for those raw materials that we buy. So people can ask a penny a pound more or maybe a penny less or something like that, but it's always usually pretty constant. So we look for the quality of the product. We look for foreign material that they may have in their product, a little chip on a piece of belt or some kind of plastic that may have gotten in there inadvertently, and we look for those types of things. But past that, a good quality beef trimming, whether it's 90, 75% lean, 50% lean, is about the same. It's not necessarily a lot different.
And do you blend those different percentages as a final product?
Yes, we buy 90s, which is the leanest. Sometimes we can buy a 95% lean, and then there's 75s, there's 81s, there's 65s, there's 50s. So there's just a large variety of fat lean percentages. There are some very common ones, and that's what most of the industry uses. And then each customer that we have has their own fat lean ratio in the patties that we provide them. Whether it's a frozen patty for retail under a store label, such as we do work for Aldi or we do work for Walmart, for example, and Kroger's one of our largest retail customers, we do it all under their label. So whatever their store brand is, that's what our products are in there. And then they will say, I want an 80% lean, or I want a 75% lean, or a 90 or 73. It's all over the board. They all have their own shape, they all have their own thickness, and they all have their fat lean percentage.
Do you buy all of your product in the United States?
We buy the majority of our product in the United States because of the amount that we process every week. We buy from almost every legitimate packer in the United States. There are packers that we won't buy from due to the quality that they produce. And then one of the problems we have in this country is lean boneless beef, that 90% lean that I was talking about. There's not enough 90% lean in this country to produce all of the ground beef that we and others produce. So we import boneless beef. And there's two reasons why we do that. One is the aforementioned, where there's not enough product available. The second is that sometimes lean beef is a value compared to domestic beef. And some of our customers have supply standards that say if this product is cheaper, you need to use this product in our product. So we import primarily from Australia and New Zealand. We do import product from Brazil and Uruguay. Canada is almost like a United States, so that kind of comes across the border all the time, although it's imported. We think of it as North American. And there is some product that comes from Mexico, not a lot. But those are the primary sources. And when you take Australia and New Zealand, for example, they have to export their boneless beef trimmings because they can't consume them in their countries. Their population is not that large. So they have to do a very good job of what they produce. So from a sanitary perspective, their plants are very well run. From a pathogen and a bacterial perspective on the meat, because we test for that all the time, that's very clean, as you would say. So it's very, very good quality product.
How many employees do you have at your plants?
Across the country, we are right at 1,000 employees. So that will be production workers, that will be managers, corporate office people. We have our own transportation company, which is based out of Kenosha. So they are in that count as well. So we have truck drivers and mechanics and dispatchers. So that's about where we're at, is 1,000. Sometimes we go a little bit over 1,000.
How many of them are in Kenosha?
Kenosha, we're probably, just the production workers in Kenosha require about 350 people to run our processes, not including truck drivers. And that gives everybody from the plant floor a perspective. And then we've probably got between transport and then managers, probably another 100 individuals in the city of Kenosha.
Okay. And where do you find your employees?
We find them all over. From a production perspective, they're primarily located in Kenosha, Racine, sometimes northeastern Illinois, but we find that production people don't travel real far to work. It's not like you're going to find them from Lake Geneva and they're going to come in. So it's pretty local. We occasionally will get some groups from Milwaukee that will come down, and but it's primarily Kenosha and then Racine and northeast Illinois. Now, when you get to a management individual, those people are more mobile, and sometimes you hire someone from another competitor, so they may come from Nebraska, they may come from Florida. It's all different.
And how do you hire? I mean, how do you find your bank or your pool of where you're going to hire from?
It's a very interesting way of going about it these days. It used to be we could put an ad in the Kenosha News and people would read that ad no matter what level of individual you're looking for, and that was always a nice opportunity. The best thing that we have going for us nowadays is that we get employee referrals. So we'll have people that are working for us, they enjoy what they do, they're proud of what they do, and they'll refer a family member or a relative or just a friend. And we get a lot of job referrals every week all across the country, not just in Kenosha. And then we also do the Indeed advertising and the LinkedIn advertising. And then when you get into the management individuals, sometimes we'll actually have recruiters that will show us individuals. So.
How did COVID affect your operation?
COVID was a challenge from a couple of different directions. Probably the more difficult challenge we had was because our business is quick service restaurant related. Anybody that had a drive-up window in their business establishment did a lot of business. Because if you remember, we couldn't go to restaurants. Even those restaurants didn't have their dine-in areas open. They were only serving out the window. So that meant that people were looking for some place to get something to eat, not necessarily cook it at home. So those businesses did a tremendous amount of business, sometimes 50 or 75% more than they had done in the year prior. So that was a great challenge for us to figure out how to get the work done, at the same time keep our people safe. So we went into our plants, we did what we could do to give people more space where they were working on the lines. If we couldn't give them more space, we put plexiglass separations so they didn't have to reach across the line and talk to somebody else. We expanded our lunchrooms so that we could have more space for our people to sit at some of our facilities, and we did in Kenosha until we built a new lunchroom, brought in portable trailers and created other lunchrooms so we could start breaking up our groups of people, staggering the times that they'd eat lunch, and making it more safe for them from just a general perspective. We masked up everybody. We built a building in Kenosha. In our other plants, we rented trailers. And that was our screening building. So every day, no matter who you were, whether you were Dennis or anybody else, you went in there, you had your temperature taken. They would ask you questions. And if you didn't answer the questions right, or your temperature was too high, you were set on the side, and then someone would come and visit with you, our coordinator, and sometimes you'd have to be sent home, and sometimes you'd find out then you were positive and you didn't know it for COVID, and then we would walk them through the scenarios. We had an individual on staff, still do as a matter of fact, and then she would coach them and guide them and provide what they needed to make sure they get through it. And so it was very challenging.
Okay. Have there been any national or international events that have affected business at one time or another?
Well, sometimes some of the things that go on in other countries where their economies grow and they become more modern, and I'm thinking of China as one of those, then when the economies improve, then they want things that other countries have and other people in other countries have. So from a beef perspective, that becomes quite an issue sometimes because they need the beef that we also need. So now because they need it so badly because they can't raise their own, will pay up money for that beef, which then takes that supply away from us. It makes it very difficult for us sometimes to get the raw materials that we need. So those types of events can put a lot of pressure on us.
Okay. How about technology? How has technology affected the way you do business?
Well, technology, there's a lot of places in our plants, believe it or not, that we can use technology. And we have so many of our processes computerized. So we have pieces of equipment that when we bring in a combo of beef, which is a 2,000-pound container, and we dump it out on a conveyor, it runs through a machine, and that machine analyzes that product from a fat lean perspective, so we know exactly what we have. It also looks for foreign material, so that if there's possibly something of a metal type object that gets in there, it can detect that, so that can tell us, it's like an early warning. And so when we go to blend, as we talked about earlier, every customer has their fat lean percentage. When we take the various components and we go to blend, we can now know exactly how many pounds of product A and how many pounds of product B we put into a blender and come out with the projected yield that we need to come out with. Whereas before, it was all by gut, so you would dump some of the 90% lean, and then you'd dump what you thought was the correct amount of 50% lean. You would blend it, you would take a sample and analyze it, and you're a little bit off, so now you got to add a little of this or add a little of that. It's kind of like cooking at home on your stove. But now it's all computerized, and it really levels out the process. It gets us much more accurate, and it gets us to do a better job for our customer because they demand within a certain percentage that you deliver a product that is accurate.
So, how about for safety purposes of the food?
Well, we do a lot of things from a foreign material perspective to detect foreign material in our processes. We do a tremendous amount of work to make sure that from a bacterial perspective that pathogens aren't present. So we do a lot of analysis. All of our raw material that comes in is tested for E. coli. There's various S-techs, as they call them, so I think there's 7 or 8 strains of E. coli that can be very harmful to a human being. And we test for all of those, and we don't receive the product at the facility. We won't even break the seal on the trailer until we have a COA that says it's free of E. coli. And there's other things that we test for as well throughout our entire process. When you have a cooked facility, which we have two of, Listeria is a very prominent bug in the facility, so we're testing all the time. Not just the product, but our entire facility. We do what's called a swab. So a swab is very similar to a cotton swab, a little bit more sophisticated. But you go around and we swab the floors, we swab equipment, we swab the walls, and we always take a look at what those swabs are, and that guides us as how we clean our plants and how we maintain our plants, how our traffic flow happens with human beings, what we do to clean ourselves before we go into the rooms, and all of that. So it's an awful lot that we put into it.
Okay. I'd just like to go back a bit to the employees. Do you ever, as a company, do things for the employees, picnics or Christmas parties or anything like that, bowling leagues?
We do a number of different things, not so much outside of work, but we do employee recognition. So there are anniversary periods that I sign happy anniversary cards for with my personal signature. They're not just stamped. And so if you have a 1-year anniversary or a 2-year or 3-year, so on and so forth, they have an opportunity to receive a card and thank them for what they do. And then there's a catalog that they can pick a small gift from. And so we have the employee recognition. We have employee safety recognition. So if an employee does something very noteworthy in the plant that attributes to either human safety or food safety, they get recognized and they get an award for that. We also have worker safety, which is human safety. So each department, if they go 60 days accident-free, then we have a luncheon for that department. Sometimes it becomes a plant luncheon because everybody in every department is free, and sometimes it's just a few departments, but we do that. And then I believe there are about 4 events that we have every year. So it begins with Taco Tuesday in May, and then in July, we do our 4th of July celebration, so we actually cook burgers for all of our employees. I know where we get them too, from our facility. And then in about late October, we have what we call our Brat Fest. So we buy bratwurst and natural casing hot dogs from Usinger's in Milwaukee, and we grill those for all of our employees. And then we buy the sides locally. So we'll get Spanish rice, for example, for May from a local restaurant. We'll get potato salad from another restaurant for 4th of July, and so on and so forth. So we provide all of that and free sodas, and we have extended lunch periods then for those celebration days. The last one that we have every year is our employee Christmas luncheon. So we take roast beef and we slice the roast beef, again by sides, and have an extended lunch period. And at the employee Christmas luncheon, they'll do a raffle. So we used to get donations from vendors of ours, and they would be hard goods, but now that's more difficult. So we give gift cards, number one, or I go to the Kenosha County Fair every year and buy live animals. We then process those animals and make them into steaks and roasts and ground beef, and we put packages together for our employees. So they're given a raffle ticket, and that raffle ticket says whether they get a gift card or whether they get the meat, and they like the meat because it's kind of special, and we like doing that. So that's done at our employee Christmas luncheon.
Okay, have you ever had a customer who has made a request that was a surprise to you, that we've never heard of this before?
Yeah, there was a big one. We began processing for Taco Bell at the same time that we purchased two different meat companies from the same owner, and closed on those in 1988. And at the time, the ground beef for Taco Bell was in a 10-pound box, and it was just pure ground beef. That got shipped to each Taco Bell restaurant, and then they would season that beef and cook it in the back of each store. And I think that got to be quite cumbersome for Taco Bell, so they said, we'd like to do that at a central location, and we'd like to do it at your plant. And we said, really, how do you do that? Because we didn't do any type of cooking or anything like that type of process. So the grinding and the blending, again, back to the fat and lean, that we knew very well, but we didn't know about steam jacketed cooking. We didn't know about the seasonings and all of that and how to mix that in. We didn't know that you could put meat in a 5-pound fresh pouch. So there was a special machine and pumps to do all of that. So that was a process that was very eye-opening for us, and we still do that process yet today. It's had some refinements, but that was a dramatic shift to go from producing raw ground beef to cooked and seasoned ground beef that people could eat right out of a pouch.
And do you do that at one of the two plants you bought at that time, or do you do it locally?
No, we do that. Both the Columbus, Ohio facility is totally dedicated to that process for that customer, for Taco Bell. And then about 4 years ago, we opened a new facility in Georgia. That's the second one in Georgia, and that produces ground beef for Taco Bell. So we have two like cooking operations.
Okay. So what is the future of Kenosha beef?
Future of Kenosha beef is we always strive to continue to do whatever we can with our existing customers. We don't do all things for all of our customers. We try to first start with what our core capabilities and our equipment will provide for us. And then we continually work with their R&D teams, and then if there's other things that we can do that just don't turn our world upside down, but might require a different process or different equipment, we'll invest in that, and we venture out into that. Some things we're successful with and some things we're not. We did a process in our Ohio facility. We put in a impingement cooking line, which is a horizontal flame broiled type line, and we were able to cook chicken breasts, and we were able to cook ground beef patties, sausage patties, pork sausage patties, and all of that. And we called that one, if we build it, they will come. Well, we built it, and they didn't always come. So that was one of the processes. When it was working well, we were doing all right. But when it wasn't working, then we were stuck with the investment. But yeah, so business is always changing. So we always look to try to do whatever we can for our existing customers. And then we look kind of around the corner, especially like at our retail customers, and what are things that they're selling in their stores. For example, before COVID, we put in what was called a cook and bag processing line in Kenosha. So we would take pork or beef and we would trim it just like a butcher would do in a grocery store. And then sometimes it would have seasoning along with it, or sometimes not. We'd put it in a pouch that the individual at home could put in, whether it was an oven or whether it was in a boiling pot type scenario, and they could cook their protein. So you could have a nice roast and you could cook it. It would cook in the bag, so all the juices would stay in there, all the seasonings would stay in there, and then you open it up. So modern day housewives or men don't like to have a long preparation time for their meals. So that business was going very well for us, and then COVID came and it knocked us out of that, and then the grocery chain that was doing that eventually decided to move away from that because of the difficulties with COVID. So, but those are the types of things that we'll venture out and try when we can get at it.
What is the best part of your job?
The best part of my job is where my office is located is on the corner of the building, and the sidewalk either into the plant for our hourly employees or out of the plant, because we run 2 shifts for production and 1 shift for sanitation. So the employees have to pass by my window, and the best part of my day is when I get to wave at the employees. They don't all wave back. Some of them are looking at their phones, or some of them are looking at something in the parking lot. But when they wave back and they smile, that is just the best feeling that there is, because these are our people and they're working for us every day. I get them on the way in, I get them on the way out. Now, I'm not there at 10:30 at night when the sanitation people come, but I'm there at 7:30 oftentimes in the morning when they leave. And it's just a good feeling when you can have a connection with your employees. The second best part is working with our customers. I like to go to our customer conventions. I like to go on sales calls at times with our customers and just interact with the customers and talk with them, talk about what we do, talk about their business. It's just interacting with human beings is a good thing, I think. So.
Thank you for joining me today.
Well, you're very welcome, Carl.